I want to take this chance to introduce our keynote speaker today. So David Berglund, proud to call him a Tommy alum. He's a leading AI consultant and strategist at Itasca Labs. He's a guest lecturer at Wharton, that other school on the East Coast. That's okay, it's a pretty good school. Served as the global head of artificial intelligence at Fidelity. Before joining FIS, David led artificial intelligence at US Bank. And now we are lucky that he is here to give a conversation to us today about strategic AI and balancing risk and opportunities. And so I want to turn the floor over to David. Let's give David a welcome to our conversation today.
Thanks, John. Hello. Thanks for having me. You saw I had some supply chain issues just trying to get set up here. That's the first and last joke I'm going to make about supply chain, so don't worry. I'm a bit excited to come here. So I'm from Florida. Obviously went to St. Thomas years ago, but it's just great to be back on campus. I was actually just at the St. Paul campus recently, 2 hours ago, talking to students who were asking questions, not just about what is AI, but they wanted to know how is the workforce changing? What are the ethical implications of AI? So it's great. There's so much here. It's not just technology, just as we talked about with the last two, or I heard about the last two speakers, thinking about the foundations, the applications. There's a lot here. So my hope through this conversation is that we'll have a chance to think through, yes, what could a strategy look like, or what should a strategy look like, ideally? But also, what are some of the challenges? How can you accelerate your path to where you are striving to be? And this is an exciting time for us. Yesterday was a birthday. It was ChatGPT's birthday, and it's 1 year old, pretty exciting. And a lot has happened in 1 year, right? And we've heard some ideas. Maybe some of us have tried it. Sounds like many of us have. And it took the world by storm. It kind of came out of nowhere, which is a common theme we've been talking about. So here is, just for some context, how long it took a number of tech giants to get to 1 million users. So Netflix, here you can see, did it in about 3.5 years. Facebook, about 10 months. So this is the bar. And all of a sudden, ChatGPT comes, and they do it in 5 days. Shockingly fast. And here, this used to be something we called Twitter. Now, again, a year ago, now we call it X. This is Sam Altman. For a few days, he was the CEO, then he wasn't, but that's beside the point. And you might say, okay, well, getting to 1 million is good, but to change the world, you need scale. So to get to 100 million users took them 8 additional weeks. So you can just see the incredible velocity. It took the world by storm. And again, you could say, okay, David, that's just one application from one company. But we're so focused on it. Why is that? Well, it reminds me of this quote from the book, The Sun Also Rises, Ernest Hemingway. There's two guys having a conversation. And the first guy says to the other, so how did you go bankrupt? And the second man says, well, 2 ways, gradually and then suddenly. And that's what happens with these emerging technologies, right? Everything seems to be like there's nothing much happening, right? We heard that AI has been around since the 1950s, but it took off just in this last year. And with that comes disruption. It's hard for us to handle. There's a quote here from Jim Keyes. He was the former CEO of Blockbuster. And we look back on it, and he says, neither Redbox nor Netflix are even on the radar screen in terms of competition. So we can look at it and laugh and say, what a fool, what was he thinking? But the other way to look at it is to say, well, what did he miss? What was the story about the future that he wasn't telling, that he wasn't thinking about? And it wasn't AI, but for him, it was the internet. He didn't believe, because they were doing work in this space, but he didn't believe that it was going to happen this fast, that it was going to change the business model from brick and mortar stores to digital. And it took them by storm. And that's not just true for the internet businesses. Just this last year, Chegg, if you're familiar with them, they're in kind of an educational company, helps students learn, take tests. Well, lo and behold, ChatGPT is really good at helping students solve answers to tests. The CEO goes ahead and says, you know what, actually, ChatGPT is impacting our business. The stock price drops 50% in a day. this is happening now. So again, what is the story Chegg didn't tell themselves about the future? Or why weren't they prepared to handle this disruption? It's a race. And the race is between the incumbents, the Fortune 500s, and the startups. And the question is, who's going to move faster? Can the incumbents take advantage of these technologies fast enough? Or will the upstarts, the startups, get scale faster? That's the race. And because of that race, people are sprinting. They're racing with their hair on fire. They're trying to figure out, what should we do? What's our response to this new technology? And what I've found is that what many companies are doing is they're attacking it in two different ways, two different wrong ways. This is what we're going to talk about avoiding. One is this idea of the field of dreams. We've all probably seen the Kevin Costner movie. If you build it, they will come, is this grand theory. And what I see a lot of companies do is they build this great data lake, this palace, very expensive, it's in the cloud, it's very fancy, and they expect all the use cases are going to come. They spend tens of millions of dollars, but no one comes. So they've got the technology, but no business value. Or they are throwing darts blindfolded. And I think this is fun, so just a quick one. This is both created by DALL-E 2, these images. And you can see the one on the right, AI does struggle with physics and the idea of darts. Doesn't quite understand how the game works. Now, here's what we're going to look at. And this is going to be the kind of the backbone for this presentation, is that ideally we're trying to achieve balance. Yes, velocity is what we're looking for. And the question is how fast we want to go will be dictated in part by our aspiration and our investment. But ultimately, we're trying to build data, talent, initiatives or projects, and the technology and tools to enable them at scale. That's the building phase. But all of that has to be aligned under your business strategy. Your AI strategy is not separate from your digital strategy, from your digital transformation strategy. They need to be one and the same. They need to be aligned. And then lastly, we've heard from some of the other speakers, this idea of governance, both data governance and the program governance. For you to achieve scale that you can trust, you need to manage the risk as well. So this is kind of my view of what an ideal future state would look like, but you don't have to do it all at once, okay? And so I like golf. I'm not a good golfer, but I enjoy the game. And there's a quote that I came across from Tiger Woods that I really like. And I think his dad actually told him this when he was a kid, right? He was 3 years old, and he was an incredible golfer. But his dad said, you can swing as hard as you want, but you need to have balance. And to me, that's what we're looking at with AI. You can run as fast as you want with AI, but you have to have balance across each of these factors. We'll talk about why in a minute. But part of the idea here is when we think of AI, some of us have this idea of what perfection looks like. This idea of, well, we want to be the next Amazon or the next OpenAI. And I think that's the wrong idea, because depending on your company, your industry, your position, your strategy, you'll have different needs. You'll have a different view of what your future could or should look like. But just be aware that you can move from just being familiar, which what some of you may be as your businesses, moving through these stages to eventually transformational. But transformational for one business might look very different for another, and that's okay. For us to have a reasonable conversation about AI, it's probably important for us to define what exactly AI is. Now, the fact is there is no one definition of AI, which makes it both fun and challenging, admittedly. You can ask ChatGPT itself, hey, what are you or what is AI? And it'll give you a perfectly fine answer. Here you can see it, talks about, the technology, the philosophical view. But all of us, when we came into this room, were shaped not just by thinking of the technology, but really the stories we've been told, right? The books we've read, the movies we've watched that have painted this picture of what AI is, right? We have this idea from the Terminator that it is a very dystopian future and we should be afraid, we should distrust technology. Or some of us have a very utopian view that, hey, this is an exciting technology, let's give away more of our data. There's probably not many of those folks in this room, but both are going to be coming to mind. And instead of defining AI from a kind of a classical view, this is how I like to define AI from more of a pragmatic view. So when I'm talking to someone in the business, trying to help them understand what's possible, we look at it this way. AI is really a set of models. And we'll talk a little bit about those, but not too much, that leverage data, ideally lots of data. We talk about big data, providing capabilities that are designed into business processes and user experiences, but ultimately, it's to provide business value. That's the goal. We're trying to drive positive ROI. Because if we can't do that, eventually the whole pyramid will fall down. When we talk about AI, really, if we go back to that kind of classical definition, most people are talking about machine learning. Machine learning has 3 primary domains of how we teach machines to learn. We used to do it with rules that didn't work. It only gets you so far. So we use lots of examples to teach these machines. Supervised, unsupervised, and reinforcement learning are those classical domains, with supervised machine learning being about 80% of how people have been using AI to date. So let's just focus there for a minute. Has anyone here used Zillow, the home buying? And even if you use it or just curious about your neighbors, the house of their home, it's a useful website. And what they do, if you haven't seen it, is they have, I think, 100-some million homes in their database. Over time, they've captured the home sales and information about homes to figure out how much is a house really worth. So looking at bedrooms, bathrooms, location, pictures of the home, the description of a home, all of these are attributes that get fed into this model. And every time a house is sold, they have a prediction, how much it's going to sell for. If they're right or wrong, doesn't matter, but they continue to optimize. And the part of the learning is every home sale, they get a little bit smarter, and that's the learning piece. But it's also the important part of the data. Because if you don't have the data correctly, if someone says they have a 2,000 square foot home and 200 bedrooms, that's going to throw off the model, right? So you have to have good, clean data. And 80% of the time that a data scientist works on building AI is cleaning up data. They're data janitors. It's the dirty secret, but that's the way this works to actually get the models into production. And it's not just estimates in terms of selling homes. You can also look at fraud or any number of other things that we want to predict. Is this email spam or not? But as we get closer to things that affect people, we then start to look at ethics. All of a sudden now, if we're deciding if someone should get a loan or not, it becomes more of a question of, well, what data did we use to make this decision? We want to look a lot more closely at whether this is biased and fair data. And I talked before about capabilities. So there's couple of capabilities, right, that are driving all these superpowers: predicting, communicating, and seeing. So AI is great at predicting the future. It can decide if you're going to watch a certain show or not, what product you might want on Amazon. It's really good at answering your Google searches and helping you turn on and off the lights, basic ways of interacting with technology, pretty exciting. And of course, seeing. Here's a picture. I took a screenshot of me looking for fish on my phone of all the images I've taken. Apparently, I like to take pictures of fish. I've taken 206 pictures of fish. And you can see it saw both, some of the bass and the sharks that I've caught over time. But also, interestingly, it saw there I took a picture of a package at the store, and it said the word fish written out. So computer vision is also understanding the words and the animals that swim in the water. So it has this kind of understanding of what I'm looking for when providing results. But recently, as we talked about, there is a 4th new capability, which is very exciting. AI can now create things, right? It can generate things, images, videos, and of course, text. It can summarize, it can write code, it can change the world. And we heard a couple of use cases, really great use cases of how AI can be applied to various industries. And I'm not going to go spend much time on these, and part of that is because it's not about necessarily all the things you can do. To me, it's more about what are all the problems that you have, and then how do we stitch together these various capabilities to solve them. The challenge that I've seen when people think of, there's this new technology, they have 2 different kind of traps that they fall into. One is they see something like this of the Pope, and they realize, well, that's not him. He's not wearing a Balenciaga jacket. Hopefully, you've realized that. And they think, that's a toy. It's just something that you can play around with and have it write funny haikus in ChatGPT or create silly pictures. The other kind of extreme is people say, I can do anything with it. And the problem is both are wrong, right? We have to temper our expectations and enthusiasm. And instead, what we can look at is, well, what works? Where are people spending money, and where are people actually driving value with these tools? So for generative AI, what we're seeing, and this is a report from McKinsey, is that sales, marketing, customer support, and coding. Those are the top areas where we're seeing actual value and investment. And it makes sense because there's a lot of data, a lot of text in each of those domains. And coding, that's all it is. It's just a language that happens to be written out in programming language, right? But it's massively transforming the productivity of developers. And people often get stuck when they're trying to figure out, well, how should I move forward with AI? If anyone here has heard of the lean startup or the business model canvas, this is kind of my take on how I and my teams think about building use cases. It's called the generative AI canvas. It's kind of a simple name. But the idea is that on one sheet of paper, you can define the idea, your whole business case. Don't write a 20, 30-page business case that, one, no one's going to read and will be stale by the time you finish it. No, instead, put it all on one sheet of paper, and you can quickly validate your assumptions. But you start with three things. Every time, you got to start here. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? Second, what is the idea? What is the high-level idea? What's the solution you want to build? And three, and this is critical, what is the data you have to fulfill that use case? And then the rest will get filled in. And once you have this, once you have one use case, the idea is you're going to build dozens more. Ideally, you're not going to build one use case. You're going to be able to look at a whole portfolio of opportunities before you start coding. And you're going to pull from financial reviews, talking to leaders. You're going to go do workshops. You're going to do bottom-up planning, market analysis. You're going to be inspired by what others are doing. And you're going to have 20, 30 different use cases, those little canvases. And then eventually, you can say, OK, let's prioritize these. This is just a very simple prioritization framework. What you're going to look at, is it aligned to our business? Do we have the data? Do we have the technical team to integrate this and scale this solution? Is there the impact there? Do I see the upside revenue or cost savings that I need? And what are the risks, ethically and back to our company, right? And then once you have each of those, you can really get a picture of where you should start and focus. And it's fair to say, OK, well, that's great. There's all these things happening, but why now? And maybe if we know why now, that will help us figure out, well, what's next? And we heard before, AI is not new. This is from the Dartmouth conference where the term was first coined. 1956. So the idea has been around for a long time, and we've seen many different leaps in terms of how humans have been defeated by AI, various forms of AI, whether it's chess or Jeopardy or Go. The universal symbol of being defeated by AI is something like this, and it happens time and time again. Now, why now? Three main reasons. All of these charts you can see, I love charts that go up and to the right. It's just something positive. But it's really three things. We've got a lot more data. Ever since the internet, everything's been digitized, and the cost of storage has gone down. We are storing and creating more data. Two is the processing power. You've heard of Moore's law, which is the idea not just of the transistors on a chip. It's not just speed, it's the efficiency. You can compute more, and you can compute more cheaper. And then third is the models are getting bigger. And as those three really work together, we can solve more and more complicated tasks. For example, here you can see just briefly on the left, this is a logarithmic scale in terms of the size of the model. Billions of parameters, so massive amount of information gets thrown into each of these models. OK, David, who cares? Well, that unlocks really interesting capabilities. Here on the right, you can see that all of a sudden now that's human performance. We're now better than humans at many different tasks because the AI has surpassed us through lots of examples over time. And it's also done really interesting things like passing law exams, MBA exams, not St. Thomas's, it was another one, so don't worry. Medical exams, and my favorite, a wine exam, a level 3 sommelier exam. Now, here again, I'll caution you, it's just the theory portion, not the tasting portion. But I believe it's just a matter of time before it conquers that as well. And here's a picture of it. So we talked a lot about the tech side of things, but sometimes it's fun to visualize it. I'm a visual person. So here on the left, and this is a good example where everyone thinks AI is brand new. Look, these AI faces were starting to be created in 2014 using generative models, but we didn't really hear much about it. And it took just a few years, but even then, a massive progression and improvement. That 2018 picture looks like a human. But yet that was still in the lab, right? That was not at scale. And now, here we are in the modern era. Any of us could go onto our smartphones or onto the internet for pennies on the dollar and create images that look whatever we want, for better or worse. So then you see, again, another, I love these charts, up and to the right. Look at this, heightened focus. Everyone's talking about it. This is the number of companies just recently who are talking or mentioning AI on earnings calls. It's on the minds of executives all over. So it might make you think, with all of this, data, progress, everyone should just, stop what we're doing and go get a new degree in computer science and data science. But I would caution you, because still, AI can struggle to know the difference between a muffin and a chihuahua. So you got to be cautious. You got to be careful. And there's other things we have to be careful of too, right? So here's another example of a picture. And if you look at it just briefly, it looks like a real photo someone took on the beach at a conference. And then you look at the legs. AI is terrible at legs and hands. If you're ever trying to figure out if it's fake or not, check that out. So you see the woman here, the second one over 3 legs, doesn't make sense. So that's just one of the challenges that you're going to run into with AI. But here, companies are struggling to scale AI, and there's really 2 main reasons. One is the access and the quality of data. It may seem like a simple thing, but no matter what, you start looking to figure out, well, who owns the data? And they're always going to be surprised by it's impossible to get, and it never has as much quality data as you're looking for. And the other is actually the valuable use cases. So here, we've already been inspired by a few use cases, and that's really important to find things that actually move the needle, that aren't just cool and shiny, but will make a difference. And then when you're trying to scale, the next phase, because you're going to run into different challenges depending on the phase you're at within your organization, but eventually integrating. If you have legacy systems, this can be a huge challenge to actually get AI implemented into your systems. Do you have the right team and talent to not only build the solutions, run them, and evaluate whether they're effective or trustworthy? And then third is security. Can you trust them from a cybersecurity standpoint? Boards across America, this is on their mind for good reason. They're wondering if our AI systems can be infiltrated, hacked, phished, et cetera. So that brings us to responsible AI. Really has 3 primary focus areas. One is bias and ethics. I think of it as just because we can, should we? Also, are we perpetuating historic biases of the past in the models that we're creating? And it starts with asking the question, and then we can start to look at the data. Second is transparency. Can we understand and explain both generally how this model works and specifically? There are sometimes for, let's say, if you're trying to get a loan, you legally have to be able to explain to someone how the model came to that conclusion. So there are times where it's simply required. And then third is accuracy. Are you actually predicting the thing that you intended? For example, hallucinations or other types of predictive models. And then, of course, governance and control. I'll run through a few examples just to kind of really help shed some light on the challenges that these models are facing or that companies face when implementing AI. So data bias. Having complete trustworthy data is really important. 2 examples, but I'm going to focus on one. Amazon, this is years ago, they've solved this problem. They had a challenge. Lots of people were applying to work at Amazon, they still are, and they thought, well, we could use AI to help filter out the best candidates, which makes a lot of sense. That was the challenge. And even when they tried to prevent the models from being biased by excluding information about gender and race and other identifiers that could be biasing the information, what they found is the model was smarter than that. They were looking for cues like played softball or other sports and activities that were representative of certain demographics. And because most of the Amazon workforce was white males, it was skewing their hiring activity in the model in that direction. So they tried to avoid it, but even then, that wasn't enough. So it shows you need to be paying not only attention to the original data sources, but also monitoring over time. Is this giving us the results that we're expecting? Second, I mentioned security flaws. Here's an interesting one. There were some hackers, which were students from the University of Washington, who found that you could fool computer vision in, let's say, a Tesla self-driving car by using these really simple black and white strips of tape. 84% of the time, the computer vision wouldn't see the stop sign. So this becomes a security, a huge risk if you aren't aware of that and you don't prevent that. Second is, this is a recent study. I talked about how computer software is being written largely more and more by AI, which is kind of interesting, and it can be written faster. But the challenge is we're also finding that coders are writing more insecure code. There's putting in not only more defects, but more potential kind of weak points in the systems. And what's funny is that the coders are more confident at the same time. So the code is worse, but they believe it's better. It's a problem. And the third category that I want to talk about is unintended consequences. So even if we have all of the systems in place to build what we think is going to be a solid, non-problematic AI, things can go haywire. So has anyone heard of Tay? It started out as a very friendly chatbot. So this, again, back in the Twitter days, Microsoft wanted to build a bot that was going to be having this kind of persona of a teenager. It was going to be engaging and build their relationship with that population. And the way that they built it was it allowed the personality to learn based on its interaction with people on Twitter. Now, I don't know if you've been on Twitter, but it can be an awful place. So, surprise, surprise, all of these people ended up interacting with and teaching Tay to be awful. So it went from like really nice and fun hello world to being essentially a Nazi within, I think it was 16 hours. And I like to picture, and this is true, that there were engineers who were in charge of deploying Tay who had to keep taking down all of the posts that Tay kept saying because they were awful. And eventually they were like, we can't keep up with this. So they shut it down. But now for us, it's a lesson in what not to do. And remembering that once you put something into production, you're not done. You still have to monitor and watch how these systems are interacting with the world. So it's easy to go down that path of, well, now, David, we shouldn't do anything. Like, this is terrifying. Let's not do any AI. But at the same time, we're starting to see just recently 2 really powerful positive use cases of AI. Here, there was a company called In Silico Medicine used generative AI to create a whole new class of drugs. And they did it in a third of the time with a tenth of the cost. So hugely positive for the world, right, if we can see more of that. And also, this came out just a few weeks ago. Google has found a new way to use machine learning to predict the weather. You might think, that's not that big of a deal. Like, that's not that hard to do. It's going to be cold tomorrow, right? Sorry, that was a Minnesota joke. But actually, companies spend $1 billion a year just to produce the weather. So imagine if all of a sudden now anyone can do it. There's $1 billion. What could the government do with that money? It's hugely positive. And one last thing. So we talked about Chegg and how they got disrupted. But lo and behold, it only took a few months where they realized we've got to do something. And we're not going to become Blockbuster. They came out and they partnered with Scale AI. And all of a sudden, they're using the data, all of their assets, and their stocks back up. And all of a sudden, they have an AI model, a generative AI tool for students. So they're thinking through how they can come back. It's the comeback of the century. So here's the question. We talked about this at the beginning. It's not how did you go bankrupt. The question is, how did you build your AI strategy, right? And we're going to do it gradually. And then with all of the assets in place, we're going to do it suddenly. And this is the last kind of view that I want us to be left with. Because it's easy when we look at the news, we hear some of these stories that the sky is falling. There's so much negativity, and to think that we just should stop. The cybersecurity attacks are getting bigger. Big tech is going to force our companies into the soup line. And it's easy to say, no, this is going to be a dark future. But at the same time, there are the tech optimists. I'm one of them, surprise, surprise, who are excited by the potential of not having to do the dull and dangerous work, of new medicines coming out, of all of the bright futures. And it's up to us to shape towards that future that we would want to create. So with that, I want to say thank you for listening.